This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Our top story, the diplomatic crisis between India and Canada has people with ties to both countries scrambling.
I also want to study in Canada and I apply for it. So students feel really disappointed with this.
We'll hear more from CBC's South Asia correspondent on the ground in Punjab. Also, Canadian auto workers vote to ratify a new deal with Ford as auto workers in the U.S. remain on the picket line.
Here we are yet again in Canada, setting a different precedent than the U.S. on labour negotiations.
And in British Columbia, tributes pour in for an RCMP officer killed in the line of duty.
Constable Brien was well loved, 7 years in the force, and he touched so many different people through the different programs that he worked through.
That's later, but first. Today is the deadline for a senior Canadian diplomat to leave India. That expulsion just part of the fallout from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's statement last week that the Indian government had a hand in the targeted killing of a Sikh activist last June in BC. Our South Asia correspondent Salima Shivji is on the ground in Punjab and tells us how people there are reacting.
On the streets of Amritsar in the heart of Punjab, there's a quiet unease spreading over the diplomatic tensions between India and Canada. It's top of mind for newspaper vendor Ashok Kumar as he reads out the latest headlines. It's also what everyone wants to talk about as they stop at his stand, a stack of papers perched on top of the seat of a scooter, all anxious to know how India is responding to Canada's bombshell, that it has credible intelligence that New Delhi was involved in the killing of a Canadian Sikh activist on Canadian soil. This shouldn't be happening, Kumar says. It's baseless speculation, and the spat will hurt regular people most of all. It's the pain of not knowing where the tensions will go that troubles many here. After India stopped issuing visas to Canadians, some fear Canada will do the same.
I really felt worried about it. I'm still worried about it.
Ramandeep Kaur dreams of studying nursing. She's one of tens of thousands of students, many from Punjab, who try for visas to Canada every year.
I apply for it. So I don't know what will happen in the future about this issue.
That same worry weighs heavily on Sarabjit Kesar as she makes a cup of tea to calm her nerves. She has a flight to Toronto tomorrow to visit her sons, both students in Canada. The tension is so high, everyone feels depressed, like me, Kesar says. Her friend Kamaldeep Guman, also the mother of 2 Canadian residents, is making anxious calls to her daughter in BC, each trying to predict what's to come.
It's a fear, like thoughts, what happened in the future.
It's not just anxiety about possible economic consequences. Many in Punjab worry the allegations will breathe new life into the Khalistan movement abroad, when most in the Sikh community in India don't want to talk about it.
And we don't want to be separate from anyone. We just want to live together.
Support for an independent Khalistan is low, says Harveer Singh, standing outside Amritsar's Holy Golden Temple. He's disappointed that the global spotlight is now on a separatist movement that has little traction here.
It's just disheartening because of these things. Some people who don't have any kind of knowledge, they just start hating us. They just portray a picture of Sikhs, then all the Sikhs are Khalistanis. This is really sad about it.
He says that's far from the truth, as many here feel caught in a political game beyond their control with very real consequences. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Amritsar, Punjab.
Some of those anxieties being felt in Punjab are mirrored here in Canada. And caught in the middle of this diplomatic dispute are Canadians with deep ties to India, uncertain of when they might be able to see their family and friends again. Sarah Levitt has more on that.
I wanted to be by his side.
Suvro Ghosh is trying to get back to India to see his father, who was recently admitted to the hospital.
The first thing which I thought was to get a visa. So I started Googling how to get a visa for India as a Canadian citizen on emergency grounds.
Unfortunately for Ghosh, who lives in Ottawa, the timing isn't on his side.
But 12 hours later, I hear this news that Indian government is suspending all the visa activities in response to whatever political turmoil is happening.
Well, I am concerned about the measures that they're taking.
Says Bill Blair, the Minister of National Defense.
We have a very significant and important Indo-Canadian population in this country, people who, are connected to family.
Still, he says the investigation into the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar is essential.
That we be able to move beyond credible intelligence to evidence so that we and the Indian government can know the truth and have the facts.
But while that investigation is ongoing, experts say it's no surprise the Indian government has responded the way it has.
I don't think the relationship has ever been worse than it is right now.
Michael Kugelman is the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C.
The current Indian government is especially sensitive to any type of criticism from the outside of its policies and politics. So naturally, it would react in the way that it has to this explosive allegation.
Stuck in the middle of all this, though, are Canadians like Suvro Ghosh.
Really sad. For my personal situation, I am sad. Overall, I love both the countries.
He's worried about how long this political situation will play out as his father remains in hospital. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
Now, we have some breaking news out of Ottawa. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Anthony Rota, is apologizing for inviting a special guest to the House during the visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. JP Tasker joined us moments ago with more details. So, JP, what is Speaker Rota saying tonight?
Yeah, Speaker Anthony Rota says he regrets ever inviting Yaroslav Hunka to see Zelensky in Parliament on Friday. That apology comes after a magazine article surfaced where Hunka wrote about his service in the 1st Galician Division. That's the group of mostly ethnic Ukrainians who fought with Nazi Germany's Waffen-SS. Rota called this 98-year-old former soldier who lives in North Bay, Ontario, a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero. In his remarks, he's walking that back tonight. Jewish groups are outraged that a man with ties to Adolf Hitler's forces received a standing ovation in Canada's Parliament. They're calling him a Nazi collaborator.
Wow, okay, and what about the Prime Minister's office?
The Prime Minister's office is furiously trying to distance themselves from Rota tonight, blaming him for the invitation. They say they had no advance notice of Hunka's presence in the chamber. In a statement to us tonight, a spokesperson for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says, quote, "The independent Speaker of the House has apologized and accepted full responsibility for issuing the invitation and for the recognition in Parliament. That was the right thing to do," unquote. There will be fallout from this. The Russian embassy has already pounced. They are using this incident for propaganda.
All right, JP, thanks so much for bringing us the details on this breaking story tonight.
Thank you.
That's JP Tasker from our Parliamentary Bureau in Ottawa. And opposition leaders are reacting to this apology from the House Speaker. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre calls the invitation of Yaroslav Hunka to the House of Commons, quote, an appalling error of judgment on the part of Justin Trudeau. Poilievre is calling on the Prime Minister to personally apologize for the invitation. The NDP's Jagmeet Singh says his party will speak directly with the government about how this happened and apologized for harm caused to the Jewish community. Hundreds of ethnic Armenian refugees have fled to Armenia in a mass exodus from the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The region has been controlled by ethnic Armenians for decades, but it's internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, which took back control in a military operation last week. Armenia's foreign minister urged the UN to send a peacekeeping mission at the General Assembly on Saturday. The region's leadership says people there don't want to live as part of Azerbaijan and fear ethnic cleansing. Armenian officials say more than 200 people were killed and 400 others injured during the military operation. The union representing Canadian auto workers says its members have voted to ratify a 3-year deal with Ford, averting a strike. The 3-year agreement will see wages increase by 15%, along with pension and benefit plan improvements. Unifor says the contract will be the basis for negotiations with other automakers in Canada. Philip Lee Shannock reports.
After announcing the tentative deal earlier this week, Unifor National President Lana Payne said that the agreement with Ford Canada would be the template.
This is the pattern now that we will use to bargain with the other two automakers, Stellantis and General Motors.
Now, 54% of almost 6,000 Ford uniform members voted for the deal that would see them get a big raise. Starting wages would rise from the current $24 an hour to $31 by the end of the agreement. Skilled senior workers' top wages rise to about $58 an hour. There are also improvements to defined benefit pensions and benefit plans, and bonuses of up to $10,000.
Here we are yet again in Canada, setting a different precedent than the U.S. on labor negotiations.
Flavio Volpe is president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association in Canada.
An indication of just how healthy the industry is again. And I think the leadership at Ford Canada should also be given kudos for seeing that and deciding to share it in a very material way with their workforce.
In the U.S., the United Auto Workers strike is entering its second week, with expanded job action to 38 General Motors and Stellantis operations in 20 states. Volpe says there are promising signs that Ford and the UAW could make a breakthrough.
In the UAW negotiations, and seeing that their escalations have excluded Ford because they think they're making movement there.
You deserve justice.
More than 13,000 United Auto Workers walked off the job on September 13th, demanding better pay and benefits from the big three automakers. Unifor President Payne says while the issues differ between the two countries, the deal with Ford Canada could be helpful.
The UAW is representing their members, and they have their own priorities to negotiate. For sure, there's going to be some overlap here when you consider that we have these agreements are with the same employers. We're supporting them, and hopefully this will help them in the end get an agreement as well.
Because the auto industry here is tightly connected with U.S. supply chains, the longer the strike goes on there, the bigger the impact will be in Canada. Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
In northern Kosovo, at least 4 people are dead after an hours-long shootout between police and a group of around 30 gunmen who stormed a village near the Serbian border and then barricaded themselves in a monastery. 3 attackers and 1 police officer were killed. Kosovo's prime minister says it's an act of terrorism by what he calls Serbia-sponsored criminals. Serbia's president has condemned the killing of the officer, but says Kosovo provoked the attack. The incident has further fueled tensions between the two nations. Kosovo declared independence in 2008, a move Serbia doesn't recognize. Charges have now been laid in the death of an RCMP officer killed in the line of duty in Coquitlam, BC. Constable Rick O'Brien died after an altercation with a suspect, and as the CBC's Georgie Smythe tells us, tributes have been pouring in all weekend.
Once again on Friday, we were reminded of the tragedies that occur to those officers who selflessly serve our communities. Sadly,
Canada's Governor-General Mary Simon adds Maple Ridge RCMP Constable Rick O'Brien to the record of officers killed on duty at a memorial service on Parliament Hill.
Our thoughts and condolences are with his family, his friends, and his colleagues. We mourn this loss with you.
Constable O'Brien died Friday morning after being shot while conducting a search warrant for a drug investigation in the city of Coquitlam, east of Vancouver. 2 other officers were also injured. O'Brien was from the neighbouring city of Maple Ridge, where a memorial of flowers and candles swells outside his detachment. Mayor Dan Rumi was there.
Constable O'Brien was well loved, great sense of humour, 7 years in the force. And he touched so many different people through the different programs that he worked through.
On Saturday, 25-year-old Nicholas Belmar was charged with first-degree murder as well as attempted murder with a firearm. The University of Ottawa tracks police officer deaths in the line of duty, and Constable O'Brien is the 10th to be killed in Canada from a violent act in the last 12 months, and the 2nd in BC in that time.
Constable La Gendarme Shaylin Yang.
Constable Yang also commemorated in Ottawa today. Doug King is a professor of justice studies at Mount Royal University in Calgary. He says police work is becoming increasingly more complex and dangerous.
You talk to police officers on the street, they will tell you the prevalence of firearms is greater today than it's ever been, and it's been increasing over the last 10 years.
An alarming thought as another community mourns the loss of an officer on duty. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Germany is on the verge of becoming only the second country in Europe to legalize recreational cannabis. Lawmakers say they're taking inspiration from Canada's example, but after months of legal wrangling, legalization in Germany may not look much like Canada at all. Freelance reporter John Last has more.
This is Germany's health minister, Karl Lauterbach, announcing his government's new cannabis law. He calls it controlled legalization, a midway point between simple decriminalization and a Canadian-style retail market. It's a compromise, Lauterbach acknowledged, and one, it seems, precision-engineered to satisfy no one.
Personally, I say what we have now is just the first step.
Christine Lütke is the drug policy spokesperson for one of the parties in the country's governing coalition, the Free Democrats. Germany's law will allow adults to carry up to 25 grams of cannabis and have up to 50 grams at home, and permit individuals to grow up to 3 plants. But thanks to European treaties banning cannabis sales, it won't allow for private retailers, the kind of shops and suppliers necessary to create the billion-dollar retail market that had some of Canada's corporate cannabis giants salivating.
I'm not shedding salty tears about that, to be honest.
Steve Rolls is a senior policy analyst with Transform Drugs, an NGO that consults on drug policy. He says the stalled rollout may be a good thing for public health.
You don't want an aggressive commercial market promoting increased consumption.
Instead, Germany will allow non-profit cannabis clubs, where growers can team up and sell the drug to members. That means their market, for now, will look less like Canada and more like Malta, which became the first country in Europe to legalize cannabis in 2021. The hope, supporters say, is that this prevents the kind of rapid corporate takeover that happened in Canada. But critics say Malta's cannabis club model isn't what it seems.
The first thing to clear up is that there is no legalization in Malta.
Andrew Bonello is the president of Relief Malta, an advocacy group. He says the current regulations are so onerous that many small growers have no hope of starting a club of their own, and that's if the government ever actually approves one.
Here we are almost 2 years later, and no licenses have actually been given.
But Germany may be different. Lütke, the MP, says Canada is still their main inspiration. It just might take a while to get there. Dirk Heideprime is the deputy chairman of the German Cannabis Business Association. He says a retail market in Germany is inevitable if the government really wants to rival black market supply.
The investments needed in that space, because there is no infrastructure, are so huge that we can't make it without corporate money.
Cannabis companies, he says, are used to waiting on governments. Germany's new law means they'll be waiting a little longer. For CBC News, I'm John Last.
A group of 6 Portuguese children and teens are about to file a climate change lawsuit with the European Court of Human Rights. They're accusing 32 European governments of violating their human rights by failing to adequately address climate change. The court's decisions are binding, so if they win, governments could be compelled to strengthen their climate change and adaptation plans. Well, for migrants trying to reach the southern United States, the Darien Gap is the most perilous stretch of the journey. It straddles the Colombia-Panama border, more than 100 kilometers of dense, mountainous jungle filled with rushing rivers and deadly animals. A growing number of people are risking their lives on that dangerous trek. Freelance journalist Manuel Rueda spoke to some migrants as they emerged from the rainforest.
More than 100 canoes arrive each day at Lajas Blancas, a camp at the northern edge of Panama's Darien jungle. The boats carry migrants hoping to rebuild their lives in North America, like Douglas Muñoz, a welder from Venezuela who traveled with his wife and their 2 children.
The
situation where we come from is not good, he says. We just want to provide something better for our children. After making the grueling trek, the migrants wait in line for buses at the camp and get help at a small clinic. Many get knee injuries and blisters on their feet during the 3 to 5 day hike across the rainforest, and others get sick from drinking contaminated water. Last year, at least 140 people died in the rainforest, according to the United Nations.
Vi muertos, niños ahogados.
I saw the bodies of children who had drowned as they tried to cross rivers, says David Rodriguez. There were bodies covered by leaves. Still, growing numbers of people are taking this route as the economies of South American countries struggle to recover from the pandemic, and nations to the north impose visa restrictions that make it impossible for many migrants to arrive on planes. This year, more than half of the migrants crossing the jungle are Venezuelans. Many are on the move for the second time, like Eliana Rivas, who had been living in Colombia for 5 years. I was just making enough there to pay for rent and food, she says. I want to do better than that so that I can support my daughter. According to Panamanian officials, more than 330,000 people have crossed the Darien Gap so far this year. That's a sharp increase from the 250,000 who made the crossing in 2022. Panama gives the migrants transit permits so that they can continue their journey north on buses. But officials here worry that migration is spiraling out of control. Juan Manuel Pino is Panama's security minister.
Ya se trata de un caso de seguridad nacional.
This exodus has become a national security problem, he says. Criminal groups are profiting, he explains, by transporting migrants across the rainforest. The United States has placed limits on the number of people who can claim asylum at its border posts each day, and threatened those who cross the border illegally with a 5-year ban on re-entering the country. But that isn't reducing the flow of people across the Darien. In August, 68,000 people made the dangerous journey across the jungle, a monthly record that will likely be broken in September.
Lo importante es que intentamos.
The important thing is that we try our best, says Douglas Munoz, the Venezuelan metal worker. There's a God up there who's watching and will decide who really needs a break. For CBC News, I'm Manuel Rueda in the Darien Gap, Panama.
People in a town on Newfoundland's southwest coast are still recovering 1 year after it was devastated by post-tropical storm Fiona. Many remain homeless in Porto Basque, and as Malone Mullen reports, while there are efforts to rebuild all that was lost, some of the damage can't be seen.
And right here is going to be a table and dining room. And that's my spare bedroom.
Patty Munden is walking through crossbeams, bare wires, and piles of insulation. This isn't her dream home. That was taken by the sea last year, but she's determined to make new memories here.
That's what I like. I like cooked suppers and family coming over. That's a simple, very simple life, but that's what I want it back.
Munden's former oceanfront home is among 159 houses in Porto Basque and nearby communities, either torn apart by Fiona or considered too close to the water to live in any longer. Mass displacement has touched every part of this town. Some are still waiting for government aid, others can't find a place to settle amid a housing crunch. Still more had to leave town entirely.
It used to be much more vibrant, it used to be much more active.
Rene Roy runs the local newspaper. He says he's never seen people in his hometown so despondent. The trauma of that storm, he says, changed everything.
This town has shifted so much. It has died since Fiona because that sense of community got demolished.
Denise Anderson embodies some of that fear and anxiety hanging over the town. She says she can't go a day without worrying about the weather. Even though her new home is so far from the ocean, she can't even see it from her windows.
Every day I check the weather. I want to know if percentage of rain, the winds.
For yet another of Fiona's victims, the storm that took her home seems like a harbinger, one that kicked off a year of climate disasters. Fires in Hawaii and Kelowna, hurricanes in California. She's noticed headline after relatable headline.
I wouldn't wish it on anybody. My heart breaks for all the devastation going on around the world right now because I have an inside view of what these people are going to go through in the next 6 months to a year.
For Peggy Savory, Fiona was a wake-up call, a warning to the world about the inescapable dangers of climate change, and a chance to alter its course in the decades to come. Malone Mullen, CBC News, Porto Basque, Newfoundland.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Starting Mondays, you can download a special curated edition of the program featuring our favorite stories from the weekend. This November, the Supreme Court of Canada will hear arguments from several First Nations and the province of Ontario. The case concerns 173-year-old treaties and a promise of money for the right to extract resources from the land. Billions of dollars are on the line. As the case has moved through the courts, a fire that burned when the treaties were first signed has been revived. Aya Dufour brings us that story.
Every day before dawn, firekeepers from the Anishinaabe of Robinson Treaty's territory hold a sunrise ceremony. They take out coals from the previous fire and use them to rekindle the flames. This is how a sacred fire travels through time and space.
The way the trial goes, you need ceremonies, you need these fires.
Walter McGregor from Wanapite First Nation is one of the firekeepers. A sacred fire burned during the signing of the Robinson Treaties in 1850, and when the Northern Ontario Anishinaabe met with the Crown again in front of a judge in 2017, the fire was rekindled.
This was how we did things back in the day. Instead of talking in court, we would gather like how we gathered at this gathering here, and this is how we would discuss, solve problems, solve issues, pass on new ways and new teachings.
While the sacred fire is an ancient tradition for cross-cultural events such as treaty negotiations, carving out a space for it in the modern Canadian judicial system is unheard of. Leroy Bennett coordinates the spiritual aspects of the trial. He says it's about more than just tradition.
The responsibility was really to bring forward the culture in the judicial system. To take it to the depth that we did was never really done before.
The first time the sacred fire was revived outside of a Thunder Bay courthouse, Bennett worried he was breaking the city's bylaws.
And I just finally kind of said, forget it, let's just do it. Well, let's go get some wood, let's go get this, and let's get started. It was not an act of defiance, but really an act of resurgence to that way of life, our way of life.
Even with billions of dollars and the future of the treaty relationship at stake, politics have no place at the fire. It is a spiritual space where court workers, counsel, judges, reporters, and members of the public can meet to build relationships. Lawyers may spend their day arguing in court, but in the mornings and during lunch break, they can gather around the sacred fire for a smudge and a teaching, no matter what side they're on.
Everybody began to realize that that fire was helping us out as the court case went on. When things got tough, and they did, then we always had something to go to.
In the 6 years that the Robinson Treaties case has been making its way through the courts, the sacred fire has moved from Thunder Bay to Sault Ste. Marie to Little Current before finally landing in Greater Sudbury. Soon, the fire will make its way to Ottawa, as the Supreme Court is slated to hear Ontario's appeal of the case later this fall. Aya Dufour, CBC News, Sudbury, Ontario.
I see the parties and the diamonds. Sometimes when I close my eyes, 6 months of torture you sold to some forbidden paradise. I loved you truly.
Despite the dark lyrics, it's a bright time to be Olivia Rodrigo. The 20-year-old is back atop the Billboard Hot 100 with this song, Vampire. Her second album, Guts, at #1 as well. But Olivia Rodrigo fans might be feeling a little less sunny.
And I know we weren't perfect, but I've never felt this way for no one.
Especially if they're trying to get a hold of concert tickets for next year's tour. It stops in Montreal and Toronto in March and Vancouver in August. Demand is nuts. Ticketmaster warning there are far more fans registered for a code that'll let them access the sale than there are actual tickets available, tempering expectations for concert goers who may have already been through a cruel summer. That battle for tickets to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour is still raging. Now Ticketmaster's trying a new move. Rodrigo tickets will only be delivered electronically and only 72 hours before the event. It's meant to deter scalpers, but will it work?
Tonight. It's a bad idea, right?
Already, Vancouver tickets are being resold for up to $2,000, and face value tickets are a pretty penny. Here's what one American fan said on TikTok.
I saw the prices. Look at this.
$510 to $840. And that is literally like not even resold. Like if I'm spending $840, I better be on stage with Miss Olivia herself. Like,
Ticketmaster is standing by its registration system, saying it's still an effective tool to beat scalpers, even if fans' wallets are drained.
Bleed me dry like a damn vampire.
So here's a little more of Olivia Rodrigo for free. This is Vampire on The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for being with us.
I tried to help you out.